Welcome everyone to Streamlining Metadata Automation with ArcGIS and FME. Today we are very thrilled to be joined by special guest speakers from Esri. Really appreciate both Bruce and Jordan taking the time to share their expertise with us here today. I will pass things over to Jordan to introduce herself.
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Jordan Duft. I'm the product manager at Esri for metadata search and discovery.
I'm Bruce Harold. I'm the product manager at Esri for the data interoperability extension, which is Esri's repurposing of FME technology inside ArcGIS. And the way that we work is that I ask SAFE to develop technology, which I believe will be helpful to Esri users. And this is an excellent example of that.
Yeah, it's great for me joining with Jordan and Bruce. Great to have you guys here. And I'm Dean Hintz. I'm a product manager for open standards at SAFE, and I'm also the team lead for our strategic solutions group. So looking forward to getting through some cool demos today.
Fantastic. And I'll also note that we're joined by both Phil and Sienna on the back end here from SAFE to answer any questions that you might have during the webinar. So if you do have any questions, please do get those into the questions tab, and I'll remind of that in a few moments here. Before we get started, just a reminder, our peak of data integration is coming up this May 6th to 8th in Seattle, Washington. So if you have yet to apply to present, please do so, and also register. I know there's also a special speaker rate available. If you're newer to Livestorm, just a few hints here on how to best use the platform. If you have any audio or video issues, you can click that help button on the bottom left for 4 simple troubleshooting steps. We have the emoji react button on the bottom middle as well, so feel free to share any reactions with us during the webinar. We love to see them. We'll have a poll coming up shortly under the polls tab, so keep an eye on that. And once again, the questions tab. So if you have any questions during the webinar, drop them there, and that way we'll be able to reply directly to them. Sometimes things can get buried in the chat, so the questions tab is best. And then lastly, keep letting us know you're tuning in from and leave any comments in the chat. If you'd like to download the deck, you can also do so with that button on the top right of the PDF. All right, at this point, I will ask if our presenters can turn off their webcams to save on some bandwidth for the remainder here. And I'll take us through our agenda. So today we'll be going through an introduction of why metadata and why it matters. And then from there, we'll be going into demos by Bruce. So he'll be taking us through generating or importing metadata during ETL, and also a demo of bulk updates of Esri portal item metadata. Then from there, Dean will be taking us through a couple demos as well, XML metadata harvest and updates. We'll wrap up with a summary of key lessons learned, as well as resources, so that you can get started on this topic firsthand to follow the webinar. And then lastly, also note we'll have live Q&A at the end. All right, with that, I will pass things over to Dean for our introduction.
All right, welcome everybody. So glad you could join us today. And welcome to the wonderful world of metadata, which I'm sure you're all excited about. Great to see people tuning in from around the world. I even saw Brazil and India, as well as, of course, Europe and North America. And so we're going to jump in and talk about how to bootstrap your metadata. So how can we use automation to maintain our metadata so that it's of higher quality and can really help us get the most value out of our data. First of all, what is metadata? Basically, metadata is just data about data. So it tells us what is it about, where is it, who generated it, when, all those kind of W questions. And yeah, who's responsible for updating it, when was it last updated, that sort of thing. That's what is metadata. Here's a snapshot from FME and ArcGIS, but in terms of what Types of metadata you might have. Here's a bunch of image tags on a JPEG, other metadata on LiDAR about where it was captured. So every type of data has its own typical metadata for that type. And why would we bother with metadata? Basically, metadata supports FAIR principles. That's findability, accessibility, and interoperability. And ultimately, the higher the quality of the metadata, the more value we can get from it. It's really important to help us support our GIS workflows because we can actually figure out what is the appropriate metadata. And ultimately, it builds trust. So there's accountability and trust built into our data because we can see where it comes from. Really, it's the backbone of our data management systems, and it helps clarify what that data is about, both to people and to machines. And it ultimately allows us to interpret raw data in a meaningful way. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into how metadata can, make our data more valuable. So another way of looking at why metadata, why not? Like why do some people, some of you might be a little traumatized by past experience of trying to maintain metadata manually. So one reason why people might resist working with metadata or find it not such an exciting topic is that traditionally metadata was more passive. So it was basically a lot of the maintenance was manual, and then the metadata would just sit there and static, so it wouldn't change, it wouldn't update to reflect the current state of the data. And so over time, it would become less and less accurate and require manual effort to try to keep it up to date from time to time. And so obviously, the lower the quality of the metadata, the less relevant. So the whole idea with active metadata is that it's always on. As the data is being updated, so is the metadata. And that helps drive analysis and intelligence from the metadata to power things like AI and machine learning, as well as just regular alerts and notifications if there are problems with the data. And can also help drive APIs and other types of automation. So there's different views or experiences of metadata from the user perspective. It's all about supporting search and discovery. So the better the metadata, the easier it is to track down, is this the right area, the right scale for your use, for your intended use? And I don't know if your experience is like me, but typically in the past, working on projects, you can spend 70 or 80% of your time just trying to find the right data and then organizing it. Having the right metadata can really speed things up. From a producer's and a data management perspective, it really helps you with your quality control, helps flag problems, gaps in your data integrity issues, data accuracy and currency. And it also really promotes interoperability. So even if you have siloed systems across your enterprise, if you have very good metadata, that can help integrate disparate systems and you can build workflows across those. And ultimately allows you to manage data governance things like the longevity, the lineage of your data, and get better reuse and value out of it. There's a lot of emerging data storage and scaling technologies around data published to the cloud, big data, things like digital twins and BIM. A lot of those really depend on high quality metadata for them to scale. And then, of course, the emerging data science and analytics technologies like business intel and AI really depend on good metadata. So ultimately, metadata is the glue that ties all of these new technologies together. So just a few quick words, types of metadata. These are just a few examples. So obviously the location or extent, the time when it was created or last updated, who created it, what type of data is it, raster, vector imagery, and then maybe some stats on that data. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, who's going to give us sort of the ArcGIS context for metadata.
Hey, thanks, Dean. And actually, before we dig into that, I'm actually going to pivot back here to where you left off with properties. And so before Dean and Bruce really get into more of the fun stuff of why we're all here today, we do want to just set up some baseline knowledge of how ArcGIS manages that metadata. And so these properties that we see that Dean has here listed on the slide, we often refer to them as well as metadata elements. Whether you're calling them properties or metadata elements, what we're seeing here in this list, this can all be captured for our data within ArcGIS. So even if you haven't actively populated, edited metadata within the ArcGIS platform, maybe you've seen metadata elements displayed. Maybe as you're perusing through your ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise, where you have those item details where a lot of this information is on display for people who are looking for the data, or as you're trying to find, is it fit for purpose? Can you even use it? Setting that up for us. But regardless if you're looking at metadata with whether it's in ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Hub, or ArcGIS Pro, everything is stored in what's called ArcGIS Metadata XML. And so again, anytime we're ingesting metadata into the ArcGIS ecosystem, whether it's editing, capturing it ourselves, these sorts of things, it's stored in this format. So this is Esri's internal storage format for metadata. Now, some of us may only need to populate specific metadata elements, properties that are relevant maybe to a specific project or specific to our own organization. Or maybe we're trying to simply just have that item information. So what we see in the middle of this graphic, what we consider maybe that core metadata, like again, shows up in item description in ArcGIS Pro or item details in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise for searching. So that is in fact stored in ArcGIS Metadata XML. But a lot of us too also need to adhere to a specific metadata standard. And so ArcGIS Metadata XML, I think of it as this metadata bucket. It's a superset of all of the possible metadata elements that the ArcGIS metadata support for the standards we support. So out of all of the standards we support, we have all of our elements stored in this metadata XML. So I want to note that ArcGIS Metadata XML, again, it's a storage format. It's not a metadata standard. But because everything's stored in this metadata bucket, we're able to adhere to those specific standards through what's called a metadata style. So when we apply a metadata style, it takes all of our metadata elements that we have stored in ArcGIS Metadata XML. It applies a style sheet, a properties, and it transforms that metadata to adhere to that specific standard. That style is going to determine which metadata elements are shown as required in the editor. It's also going to determine how it's exported and viewed in HTML and the XML records. And so by storing metadata in this comprehensive way, all in this same storage format, it really provides flexibility for us as we're constantly getting updates and changing of metadata standards and user requirements. So it allows our organization to easily support maybe multiple metadata standards in concert with one another. So easily able to transform between an ISO standard to FGDC and not lose any information during that transformation. The metadata we're capturing and we're storing in this internal storage format, Esri's internal storage format, it's tightly coupled with the data. As a best practice, right? As your data evolves, as it's moving, so should the metadata. And so in ArcGIS, metadata is closely coupled with data and web layers. So in this diagram on the left, we can imagine we're in ArcGIS Pro, and maybe we have 3 different layers that we need to publish. All 3 of those layers have their own metadata. And so when we publish that to maybe an ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online, that data we publish is going to be coupled with the metadata. So that metadata is flowing to that web layer. So this is saving us time. We're not having to constantly repopulate that metadata as it's being published, as it's flowing. So metadata should flow with your content as you're producing, publishing, collaborating, reusing, and interconnecting your content with users. But as we're all aware, there are challenges. And so I'm going to leave it here. Our first poll, I think, is what is your biggest challenge related to metadata?
Awesome. I've got that poll published now as well in the polls tab.
Thanks,
So if
Elizabeth.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, if everyone wants to head on over there and place your vote. It looks like actually pretty well spread out between the top three here. We have most votes now.
Yeah, I was going to suggest updating could include synchronizing, because that's always a challenge, but it looks like that's definitely in the lead. With conversion pretty close behind, or generation.
Yeah, thanks everyone for voting there. That definitely helps give us some insight. All right, we can close that out.
All right, I guess next step is looking at FME and ArcGIS and data interop and how that can simplify some of these challenges that Jordan just covered. And yeah, why don't we turn it over to Bruce? And Bruce, why don't you take it away and show us some nifty ways that data interop can support the ArcGIS platform in terms of metadata management.
Hey, thanks, Dean. I thought that poll was great validation of what we're going to present today, because all three of the top challenges are going to be solved by what we're going to show you today. So the start of the show, I'm going to show a couple of ways to automate the maintenance of metadata alongside data, but the start of the show is going to be the ArcGIS Online connector, which has been out for a number of years now, but has been enhanced to support the read and write of metadata, along with the many other things it already does. So the connector is a transformer in the workspace, but you first must download and install the package from FME Hub. So from our side of the fence, ArcGIS Pro 3.3 and 3.4 users can use this package, and FME 2024 easily, I forget how far back in builds it's supported. But that's what that's a key element or feature that I wanted to call out straight away. Now, if you're going to automate the maintenance of an information product, you're going to want the metadata to flow with the data, just like Jordan described should happen and does happen in ArcGIS. So my goal here with my first demo is going to show how to automate that writing. The only blockage is you might not know that you could. Key knowledge gems are that you can do this with Python inside FME technology if you wish, but the least resistance, least friction is to use the ArcGIS Online connector for this work. And the result being that you have hands-free automated metadata management alongside your actual data. So at this point, I'll go with a demo. It's around the landscape around where our hosts are based in Vancouver, Canada. Ready? Okay, now you're looking at ArcGIS Pro, and there's the data source list of table of contents. There's geodatabase data there, and it's points on the map are building permits that are issued in Vancouver. So we're browsing, you see they're symbolized by the type of work. It's an attribute in the data. So zooming in on a feature of interest, this little red dot here, if I click on it, I can see that it is indeed a new building, as the legend suggests. And if I click on it, I can see there's related data. These are related tables for extra details to do with the point. So you can pretty much live in that building because it's got everything you need, food, dwelling, office, and so forth. So that's my actual data. And let's see, just go back out to the full extent and we'll see how much of it we've got. Back to the this extent, sorry. So how many are there and what is the metadata to do with them? Just attribute table quickly for the three selected items, the base points and the related tables. I see there's 3,820 point features there today, and however many there are of the related tables. So what about the metadata? I got that in at the same time I imported the actual data. We can look at the metadata in Pro. I can see I've got basic single line entries for each of the objects in the geodatabase. So I put that in there with my ETL tool, and I'll show you how I did that momentarily. So nothing too fancy, it's just basic metadata, but I got it in there in an automated fashion without having to key it in with my tool. Anytime I re-imported the data, the same thing would happen. Now, where did the data come from? The City of Vancouver operate an open data portal. It's not Esri technology. You see they've got 189 data sets there today. The one that we're dealing with today is building permits. Look, there's a lot richer description than you saw in Pro, right? So that's going to be of interest. If we zoom in on the map, we have a nice interactive way to look at data, click on this guy here, and you can see what the values are. But we're ETL people, we want to export that stuff into ArcGIS. So there's a way to do that. The export tabs, as you see, I can get a lot of nice, easy handled formats. And there's 4,221 records if I filter by today's date, available as GeoJSON, which is what I'm going to run with. There's that richer metadata still staring at us, and we need to get hold of that. So the first spatial ETL tool, which is an FME workbench behind the scenes, brings the data into GeoDatabase. You can preview it there, the tool properties. It looks like a workbench because it is a workbench. Let's edit that tool, and we see that, let's close down the navigator pane here. I'm reading GeoJSON from a URL. Over on the right, I'm writing to GeoDatabase, 3 output feature types, points in the 2 tables, a little minimal processing in the middle that just splits out the tabular data from the point data. And check out the shutdown script. Now, this might feel like an anti-pattern to you FME diehards, but there is a place for scripting in this technology. And with ArcPy at your fingertips, you have everything that Pro can do, and you can automate it as part of your ETL. So that's, if you like, a pro tip. Pun intended. I can create the relationship class for my output data that you can't, FME otherwise can't do, and I can create layer level metadata. That's another pro tip. Again, create a metadata object for each of my 3 objects I'm dealing with, write some stuff in there, might be data statistics, and we're good. However, I want to get better metadata like I saw on the city's website. How do I do that? All right, so the information product I really want to maintain is a feature service published from those 3 objects. If I scroll down in Vancouver's website, I can see there's what's called a download catalog. It's not a data dictionary, it's actually a collection of metadata in various spreadsheety formats. So if I go to an actual spreadsheet, there it is after downloading. Various columns, and it's the title of the data, each row. Remember, there's 189 objects available to me, and some nice juicy column there looking like a description there. And let's highlight the building permit row here. The description is in fact a bunch of HTML. So that's what looks nice on a website and what I want to get into my data product, information product. There's a number of columns off that aren't visible, which you also want to use too. So that's the stuff I want to map into my information product. So how do I do that? There's a derived tool, a workbench from my original one that does pretty much the same processing, except this time writes out to, and I'll edit it here, writes out to the feature service I published from my map. So same stuff on the left and in the middle, GeoJSON to URL. This time I'm writing out to a feature service and doing change detection so that only the delta writes at any particular day. And lastly, and most important, I'm updating the metadata for the feature service. Quickly go back to, there's my output target feature service. It's got the basic metadata inherited from GeoDatabase at the time of publication. So this is what we want to improve in an automated fashion at the same time as the data. Okay, back to Pro and the workspace. I'll run this guy, and just to highlight there by wiggling that thing, I'm maintaining information product, and I'm refreshing the metadata when the feature data itself changes. This takes about 30-40 seconds because I haven't refreshed the data in a while, and there's been a lot of activity in Vancouver. So I like to watch the action. I'll stop moving this around so you don't get dizzy. But see, 4221 is the number of features I'm expecting, and there they go. There's several hundred changes written to the feature service. So that presses that data through. And lastly, I am updating my metadata by reading the metadata catalog, that spreadsheet that you saw in Vancouver's website, and doing a little bit of test. I'm just picking out one row of the spreadsheet to use to set my item details using the ArcGIS Online connector. There are fancier ways than just using attributes like you're seeing here. Dean will cover that. You can get hold of an XML document and work with that, but I'm just going to go with the attributes pulled from the spreadsheet columns. So now, if I refresh the information product or item description for the feature service, there you go. Much richer metadata pulled real time from the spreadsheet on Vancouver's website and associated with my refreshed feature service, which has 3 layers. So everything is there now. And right now, hopefully there's a few light bulbs going off in the audience here that, wow, I can now automate my data and my metadata, and I don't have to use any editing environment. Just to make a point here, we do have the whole 4221 features in the data now, and so our work is done. So that's what I wanted to show you with a couple of ways to get metadata in. Don't forget, you can still script it with a bit of Python inside your ETL tool, your FME workbench, or you can just use the ArcGIS Online connector for end-to-end. Here we go. We're getting through. Okay, so that was my demo. So let's recap what you saw. Step 1, ETL into geodatabase. This, by the way, is a very common 3-stage process that I implement a lot. Get the data into geodatabase, because that's where you author things like the map behavior, scale dependencies, symbology, and pop-up behavior, and all the rest of it. And you can express relationship classes and basic metadata, which otherwise FME won't do for you. Then all that metadata that I captured flows through to the feature service information product in my portal. So that might be ArcGIS Online, it might be ArcGIS Enterprise. They both work just the same. The third leg to the stool was on any schedule I like, and in fact with this building permit data it would be daily. I can go back to Vancouver's website, refresh the actual point features and tabular features from the GeoJSON link they provide, and also pick up from the spreadsheet link that they provide any changed metadata, and refresh my data and metadata in my information product. So there you go, that's my first demo. I'm now going to change topics a little bit to cover how do I do this across my entire portal. So what the picture is supposed to show here is that there's some source of data, and it's all those sources of data, no matter how many there are going to maintain or be used in any number of portal items, hundreds or even thousands of portal items. So how do we do that? All right, so let's go to bulk metadata editing. The goal is, in fact, this bulk maintenance we just described. We're going to be using the ArcGIS Online connector, its ability to read and write metadata. We're going to use it to get, edit, and write item details, and the end result is my nice portal maintained. Okay, let's roll with another demo. Okay, now here's my data that I'm working with today. City of Los Angeles here in California have maintained street addresses on a daily basis. The Bureau of Engineering does it at the city. There's, you see, just over 1 million rows. There's 18 columns. There's some limited metadata on the website here, but which I could get hold of if I tried hard enough, but there's a better way. The better way is that for the open data portal technology that LA are using, there's always a JSON document available with the current metadata at a URL. So highlighting a few of the things which we can repurpose inside our own information product. It's just a JSON document at a URL. So what I did, in fact, was I split those 1 million features up into one feature service per zip code or postal code in LA. There's 145 of them. So this is just to give you the idea that I'm mimicking a big portal full of any kind of portal item. They just all happen to be feature services. Now, if I really wanted to, I could edit the metadata for each and every one of them in Online's metadata editor, but that would be pretty time consuming. I don't want to do it. Here's the data on a map. The blue dots are the street addresses in Los Angeles, harvested sometime in the past. You can see there they are, street addresses, no surprise there. And zoom in a little bit so we can get a little bit more clarity here. I pulled out some of the layers from my import into a group layer here, which I'm showing in this, we call it pink lemonade color. Just show that there are multiple feature services there. I'll just turn an extra one on and it will appear. So you can see and edit metadata in Pro. If you've got 145 to do, if you went back to your portal and you see where over here, that one there, here I could go through and add them all and start editing metadata. That would take me a long time. I want to automate that. So in either a browser or Pro, you could do it by hand if you really wanted to, but I think you're here because you don't want to do things by hand. So let's automate that process. Okay, I have a spatial ETL or FME workbench for the purpose, and I'll bring it up here, edit mode. Bulk metadata edit is the topic. Now, the first thing I do is use the online connector to list all the items in my portal. So it happened to be in a folder. This is how I put this stuff together. So it gives me 145 features. I get the metadata onto feature attributes with the online connector, a second instance of it. And I apply a business rule. Now, this is just to make the point. You can do anything you want with your own business. I've just decided that even numbered zip codes don't deserve metadata, so I'm not going to give them any, but as odd numbered ones I will. So that's fake business rule, but this makes the point that you can do this kind of thing. So what does null metadata look like? You just write in a null to the element that you want to zero out. So there's a tip that you can do that if you want. Whereas odd zips that do get metadata, I'm going to pull the metadata from that JSON document at the URL that you see in the call out there. I do some simple processing, which won't surprise anybody. I'm just joining things there. I'm making a comma separated tags element, which is how ArcGIS wants to receive the tag list. I make up some fields and set the values that are going to be used in the online connector to write the metadata. Very simple. Quit that guy. Now, the end game here is, of course, to write those values. And I'm just setting the details for my portal item keyed by ID to receive those values. Now, it's not very exciting metadata, but here's an even numbered portal item or zip code that doesn't have any metadata values at all. You're just getting default links that will help you edit the metadata. So I've achieved my zero metadata status for my even numbered zip codes. And I'll look at, excuse me, momentarily in another portal item here, an odd numbered zip code, 90001, and it does have the metadata I pulled out from the JSON document that the city hosts for us. That, by the way, 145 feature portal items took about 2.5 minutes for the metadata to be maintained. So pretty fast, certainly a lot faster than you will experience if you write it all out or edit it by hand. So I'm getting some applause there and some smiley faces, so that's good. I think then that's what I wanted to show in terms of demos. Handing it off to Dean is going to show you some of the higher end ways to do this kind of work.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, Bruce, for taking us through those demos and showing how we can use the ArcGIS Online connector, its new capabilities to work with the feature service metadata and automate that metadata management so that, we don't have to sit there and do a lot of manual interaction. I also appreciate Jordan giving us that sort of the context for the ArcGIS platform and metadata and how the ArcGIS metadata is really, the ArcGIS metadata XML is like a superset of all the different standards that we need to support or different users want to support. So that's really important that we have systems that comply with these standards because that allows all these subsystems to ultimately be interchangeable and exchange information about data to support automation. Yeah, thanks for clarifying how that works. So I'm going to focus on XML. What Bruce was doing was updating the metadata details, like the get and set details. I'm going to show how you can do a similar thing, but using the XML metadata documents. So in my first demo, I'm going to look at how can we harvest metadata from source tables. The obstacle to that is in this particular demo, we don't actually have any metadata portal. There's no existing metadata, so we have to somehow automatically generate it from the data itself. And the solution is going to be using FME to essentially mine metadata information from the data. So there's a few tricks there. It's just scratching the surface. There's a lot more that you can do with FME, but I just wanted to give you some examples of auto-generating metadata from the data. So the main steps are going to be, we're going to start off with feature service metadata that we're going to reset to blank it out. And then we're going to read a source geodatabase for the Vancouver area, harvest metadata from that, merge it into an XML template for the metadata, and then use the ArcGIS Online connector to update that. And then we'll see the impact on via the browser of ArcGIS Online. So if we can go ahead and run the first, let's have a look at the first demo. So having a look at what's there, we have a simple FME workspace, which uses the ArcGIS Online connector, connects to my feature service, and you notice it has the action of get details. So just getting the metadata and data set details for that feature service. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that. And I wanted to point out the view of this from Data Inspector. So when you bring this up in Data Inspector, you can see the metadata tags that Bruce was updating, things like summary and description. I'm going to focus on the metadata XML. So all of that information is also contained in this XML document, and that's just another view of that metadata. But we can also use that to do updates, to update all that superset of ArcGIS Online metadata. So the first thing I have to do is blank it out. Unlike the metadata properties, the typical details, I can't just write null. I actually have to use an XML template that's valid XML. So that's one hint there. Make sure you're writing valid XML. If not, it'll come out the rejected port. So you can see this ran successfully. So now we're going to jump over to ArcGIS Online. And when we refresh this view, you will see a lot of the details and extent information disappears. So you can see the description is none. And then if I wander over to the metadata, you can see there's no title. And if I go down into the extents, there's nothing there. Yeah, it seems to show like Africa or something. Now that we've reset that metadata, how can we harvest from the geodatabase? So I'm reading a dozen or eight or nine different feature types. I get the bounds from that. I have a timestamp that I'm generating so we know when it's last updated. The aggregator is concatenating things like a list of all the feature classes. I'm generating an extent string for JSON because that might be useful down the road. And then I have a description here, which is dynamically generated from categories and a list of feature classes in the data. So there's lots of other things we could add, but I just wanted to have a few examples and you can extend that. So here's where we're using the XML templater, which functions like a mail merge where we merge values in. You could see I was merging in the extent values that the bounding box accumulator generated. And then I'm going to go ahead and write that with the ArcGIS Online connector. You'll notice here that instead of update details, which what Bruce was using, I'm using replace metadata XML. So that's the key. So we're going to operate on updating that XML as opposed to the details. So we can see we just ran that. We'll go back to ArcGIS Online, the view of my feature service, refresh that, and then we'll see that there's a bit more information, title and description that gets written to it. And then if we go over to the viewer and editor, we can see there's a little bit more information in there as well. So besides the title, there's author, again, that description, and then the extents, you can see the extents have also been updated. So that's all automated. We could run this across hundreds of data sets. The whole point here being this is scalable, so you wouldn't just need to do this for one. You could do this for as many as you want. This is the XML view on ArcGIS Online, so you can see this is the ISO 19115 ISO standard, and you can see where again those extents values have been updated. Yeah, so that's basic. That's the end of my first demo there. And let me just continue. So this is just a review of what we've covered with some of the updates. These are the steps for harvesting the metadata. They're generating timestamps, extracting things like, there's also the ability to extract field names. There's a good idea. I have an XML validator, so it's a good idea to validate your XML before you try to update it. And then this is just to emphasize that it's the metadata XML property. That's what we're updating. And a little hint there, you can actually use HTML in that. So that's, after a bit of trial and error, I figured out that's the way to format your data. And there's the result. So besides writing metadata to ArcGIS Online, we also support updating geodatabase metadata. There's a really good article on our knowledge base for how to do that. I don't have time today to run through it. So in this case, you do something very similar, but instead of writing to the metadata XML property, you're writing to a field called GeoDB metadata string. And so that's one of the modes of the FME's geodatabase writer that allows you to automate the update of geodatabase metadata. So that's just what that workflow looks like. And then there's also the ability to use XML updater. So we have another article that, so why would you not use the templater, but use XML updater? So in the case where you only want to make 1 or 2 changes, let's say you're just changing the mod date or changing an extent, but you're leaving everything else the same, you could use XML updater, because what that does is it just operates on one part of the metadata document, and that you don't have to worry about generating everything else. So the updater is a handy tool, and I'm going to show you now how to do this just with one record, one metadata document that I downloaded from ArcGIS Online. And here we're going to use the XSD-based XML reader and writer. We don't have a special metadata reader writer. We just use the XML reader and writer. But just as we run this demo, just a comment that this text line input-output could easily be a data feed from an API call. So we could just be interacting with an API, reading the metadata, and updating one property, and then writing it back. So let's have a look at a bit more detail at that demo. Just a sec while we spin that up. So first of all, we're just going to build this from scratch. So we read the source metadata that we want to update. And again, this could come from a feature service or locally, a local file. In this case, I'm just using a local copy of the metadata. So there's the source metadata. And my goal is going to be, right in here, I have the responsible party individual is just none. So I just want to basically add my name to this data and say this is something that I've worked on, and so I'm going to update it with my name. So first of all, before we bother to run the XML updater, it's always a good idea to make sure the metadata is valid. So we check for the syntax. Next, we can define the property that we're going to update. In this case, just the contact name. And then we're going to add the XML updater. And again, this is a little bit more of a somewhat intermediate advanced when you start getting into editing XML, because you have to do things like figure out what the feature path is. We're showing you what's possible, and we have lots of tutorials. If you're newer to XML, there's lots of tutorials to give you background on how to do that. So we have a bit of a shortcut here. We have to figure out what the path is in the XML to update. We don't actually have a GUI for that in the XML updater. So what I'm doing is a little shortcut. I'm using the XSD XML reader with the tree control to navigate the structure of the data and find out the path I need for update. I'm not actually going to keep the XML reader. I'm just using the GUI to get that update path. And then I'm going to paste that in to the expression. First of all, we read the text line data. That's what we're going to update. We're going to replace the context of that path and pasting that. That's what I got from the XML reader. And I'm just going to put, just to expedite this, I just typed it in, but I could put the attribute value dynamically in there. I have to connect both the document and the update to the input. In this case, it's a little bit of a trick. And then all we have to do now is assign the output to overwrite text line data and write that back out. And then when we run this, you're going to see that we've managed to update that. So the XML updater is a very powerful transformer for doing those kind of bulk changes of just a few properties. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that to write out the whole document, because there'd be a lot of updated expressions. But for just a few properties, that's certainly a handy way to go. So let's just tie this in and run, and then we'll have a look at the output. And Notepad++, if you are using that, make sure you have the XML extensions. And yeah, it's always good to have that formatted. So there's, you can see my name has been added. So it used to be unknown or none, and now we have my name in there. So you could update whole segments in there as well, number of properties. So I think that wraps up my second demo. And this is, very useful for working with ISO from whatever application you might have. And so just to wrap up, clearly automation is the key to keeping high quality metadata, as both Jordan and Bruce's examples have also shown. We covered off here harvesting metadata from a source geodatabase. So when you don't even have any to begin with, there's lots of information. We could also harvest things like the coordinate reference system, code lists, you name it. So there's a lot of other things we could do in there, compute maybe statistics on the data and put that in the description, update the thumbnails. So there's lots of other things we could do. I kind of wanted to introduce you to that idea. And then the XML updater is a very powerful tool for updating very specific metadata properties, and you can do that across as many data sets as data documents as you want all at once. Just to review the FME tools we covered there were XML templater, which is that whole mail merge idea where you can double click on a value and merge a particular FME field in and make that dynamic in your XML template. Of course, the big star is the ArcGIS Online connector, which allows us to maintain these metadata properties online, and the XML updater. So let's look at a couple of quick conclusions, and then I think we have time for questions. So I just wanted to reiterate a few key points here. Support for standards is key. And as Jordan pointed out, while the ArcGIS metadata XML in the background is not itself a standard, using those style sheets with all the leading standards that you need to, whether that's ISO or FGDC or Inspire. Metadata helps us support data integration and flow across the enterprise. That helps us span silos. So even if you have very different types of data, very disparate systems, metadata can give you a unified view of what's going on with your data. As Bruce showed, the simultaneous update, wherever you can, if you can update the associated metadata when you update the data, then everything stays. So again, automation makes that possible. And then if you have missing or out-of-date metadata, we looked at a couple of options. One is bulk load, so migrating metadata from, let's say, a metadata portal or a catalog, and then the example I showed was automatic harvesting of metadata. And of course, the tools that both ArcGIS and FME have to work with JSON and XML are really key, because that helps you convert from whether it's spreadsheets or between different representations into that structured metadata document. Here's a quick summary, and then anybody else wants to jump in. So just to summarize, FME and ArcGIS give you a bunch of tools that help you maximize the value of metadata, and using these active metadata principles supports faster and easier access to the right data, so you can get to work on and not get lost looking for it. Drives automation, so it takes some of that pain and suffering of the old manual methods of working with data, takes that away, and really provides that glue to integrate across silos and feeds innovation like analytics and AI. So anybody else want to, anything I missed? We covered quite a bit of ground today.
I think you got the summary there, Dean. I see we've got interesting questions, which the crew backstage have done a good job responding to.
I'm happy to take us through some wrap-up resources here, and then we can have a few minutes at the end here for questions. That sounds good to everyone?
Sure, sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so if you are newer to us at SAFE here, we've been in the data integration game for over 30 years with over 200,000 users around the world. And I'll just note for resources today, we do have some great resources pulled together here. Just a reminder, you can download the deck, top button on the PDF, and click through these links. But we've pulled together just to highlight Bruce's metadata blog is a great resource. Dean's also done a past metadata webinar. And then also we have lots of resources on the community there as well. We're all about free resources here at SAFE. Our academy offers free instructor-led training, and also check out our upcoming and on-demand webinars. We also have podcasts offered, so if you're looking for some more audio-based learning on the way to or from work. In terms of next steps, so we do have an email address here provided by Bruce as well. So I will drop that in the chat just in case anyone has any follow-up questions they might want to ask. There's an email there, so you're welcome to get in touch directly with Bruce and Jordan and their team over at Esri, and then info@SAFE as well. We're happy to help you get started. The community badge code, if you're a member of our community, we have that here on the screen. I'll also drop that in the chat. If you're not yet a member of the community, please check it out. It's a great place to network with other users and experts alike. Reminder of our peak of data integration coming this May 6th to 8th. And with that, we have a few minutes here for Q&A. So I'll invite Phil and Sienna on stage if they want to join us here, and we can take a look at the questions panel.
Yeah, there's one that was answered, but just to make it very clear, the ArcGIS Online connector also works for ArcGIS Enterprise. So
Awesome.
It's one and the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just going to show on the resources that Crystal from SAFE just published an article on our knowledge base yesterday afternoon. So it's good timing. That's on the deck there.
Oh, awesome. I can drop that link in the chat as well here.
Sure.
Yeah, there was a couple of questions on AI that the presenters could potentially address. One about AI agents helping with metadata. There's two of them. Yeah, let me just reread them. Or maybe, Sienna, are you on? Do you recall those?
Yeah, so there was one which is basically after you have excellent metadata, what percentage of geospatial tasks do you think could be completed through AI in the future? So just more of a theoretical one.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and then I'm sure others might have some ideas. It all depends on what type of AI you're working with. If you're working with a sort of a LLM, like a language model, then clearly you have to generate metadata. But first of all, metadata is an ideal thing for LLMs to process because it is structured text with built-in semantics. And so it's a lot easier for an LLM to consume metadata than it would be, say, a shapefile. So that's one bit of background there. Now, to some extent, if you can populate your metadata description, if you can look at, like you could use, in theory, you could use FME to harvest metadata about what's in the data and describe it more richly, like the number of records or statistics on, let's say, surface area, which areas are above or below flood level, like whatever stats you're interested in, let's say a population stat. So if you could extract that from the data and insert it into the metadata, then that could help drive your LLM. Now, there are lots of other types of AI tools out there, and I wouldn't call myself an AI expert. In terms of spatial analytics, that gets to be a bit more involved, but you can even do the resource augmentation RAG, so you could generate RAG documents as well, or use point AI RAG at metadata because you're considering that authoritative, and so that would inform your LLM about the contents of the data. And really, I think it wouldn't matter if it's raster, vector, database, cloud. If you have rich metadata that describes that, then your AI would understand it better.
The other AI one was basically, have you tried running your data through to get a description automatically populated? In the past, I've had issues doing similar things, but I was wondering if anyone else has had success with it.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else, Bruce or Jordan, if you've ever tried that. I have not. I can't really speak to it. I think it might be a way to, when I have done similar things, when I've had AI generate a script, it will give you a starting point, but it's probably going to have problems in it. That's the one thing with, if it's not really deterministic, it's a bit ad hoc, a little random when you're doing it that way. So I think I don't know. What do you think, Bruce?
I have seen an R&D effort here at Esri that does generate rich metadata through using AI, but I hasten to add this is not something that is going to be productized anytime soon. It was just people having a play with the LLM at the back end. So yes, it can be done, but then you have to monitor quality because this stuff lives a long time.
Yeah, I'll just mention Esri currently is like looking into R&D of the metadata AI, but again, it's just in those early phases and looking through what's going to make sense. But definitely, as especially people on this call, if you're experimenting or looking at things or you have feedback, we'd definitely be interested in hearing from you.
Okay.
We have also lots of
questions.
Yeah, we have lots. There was another one about updating data or updating your metadata in your SDE. Do we have any resources that users could go to in order to figure out how best to handle that automatically?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I was just going to mention, and this kind of came up, I think Anna was asking this question as well about online, and if I publish, where should I edit that metadata? So really, it should be driven by the data. So if you have feature classes stored in an enterprise geodatabase, an SDE, that's registered with ArcGIS Enterprise, that similar to the data, that data is referenced in place, the metadata is going to be referenced in place as well. So that's kind of a fundamental difference than what we traditionally see in ArcGIS Online, where that data and metadata are copied, and there's like it's disconnected from where that source data is. Where Enterprise, you have options whether you copy this data or it remains in place. So that's important to keep in mind. I think is the main factor of how, especially where you're determining that metadata management should be driven by how your data is managed. I don't know if Dean or Bruce, you have any other input from your lens of.
No.
From the FME side, if you're talking about geodatabase, it doesn't matter if it's file geodatabase or enterprise geodatabase. So if it's geodatabase on SDE, you could use the same GeoDB metadata format attribute to do the update. If it's some older version of FME, older version of SDE that doesn't include geodatabase support, then you could contact support and we could look at that. There was a question there about does this apply exclusively to like FME with ArcGIS? A lot of the principles we've talked about here would probably relate to working with metadata in general. And I think most of these workflows, it wouldn't matter if you're running it in FME or in Interop, they would work in a similar way. There's always little configuration quirks that might be slightly different, but I think the basic logic is the same.
Mm-hmm. We try and make them the same.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Are we okay to keep going for questions, or should we wrap up? Because there's still more, but I don't want to.
Yeah, I think we're okay to keep going for a few more minutes here. It looks like we still have quite a few folks who are able to stay a few minutes later. So thanks, everyone. If there's a couple more we want to pick out.
Yeah.
Sure. I can see one from Andrew. It really should be Jordan's care. I don't know if she can see that. Oh, here we go. Sienna's answering live. Here we go. So throwing you under the bus, Jordan. We may have to do this offline.
Oh yes, the top one. We use the same ISO standard and metadata XML as Esri, but ours has an additional element. If we import it into the full XML, would it ignore the additional element, or would it hold it here? So when you import it, what should happen, so if it isn't in the ArcGIS metadata XML, again, the big bucket I was referring to of elements, it won't show up, so it will just drop it. However, I am interested if it's like a part of a specific ISO standard that you're expecting or you're wanting to be within the ArcGIS XML, I would love to hear from you. Additionally, if it's extended as well, that's just maybe specific to organization, I would still be interested in what that is, just from a gathering requirements. But that is typically what happens. So if it's not in the ArcGIS XML, when we transform it using that metadata style, regardless if it's ISO, Inspire, NAP, it just won't show up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if it was just one or two key elements, like obviously if it's a full extension, then I think, to Jordan's point, that would be good to contact Esri about that. If it was one or two properties, you might be able to figure out a path to merge that into something like a description. Find a different field, a different property where you could store similar information. And then certainly these ETL approaches would allow you to map that over to Esri's or a standard ISO 19115 schema and populate it that way. And that way, at least you're not losing that information. You just might be putting it in a different place.
I think that's such a good point to bring up, Dean, because I think a lot of folks, especially when we're thinking about, we mentioned traditional versus like active and reinventing, standards are put in place for a reason to bring us in and have that ability to formulate trust and compliance and all of those things, which is great. But thinking about how those standards can work for us so that we still are able to maintain that richness, but maybe we're just redefining or directing our users to look in a different place or kind of adapt what we think some of our requirements should be to those standards.
Yeah. And if you could, I think it is important, even if you do start having conventions like that, to document it and have your own a well-defined profile of how you're doing it so that you're consistent across your organization. Because yeah, if you just do this ad hoc, then you're defeating the purpose of the standard. But yeah, in many cases, things like 19115, they're huge standards, and we're all using a fairly small subset of that. And so it's just important to document what our profile is and be consistent. Anything else jump in there? I see something about XF metadata.
Yeah, I think that's talking about, so when you have like data from field maps, it often has like a JPEG attached to it. So our JPEG reader should be able to get that XF data for you. So that's probably easier than going through the HTTP caller, unless you know something different, Dean, or have a different version.
No, that would certainly, just using the JPEG reader, like a feature reader, you could do it dynamically, write that JPEG, or even you might be able to interpret it. There's a number of ways that you could consume it and then pull out those XF tags dynamically. And then if you had embedded JSON, you could certainly flatten that and map it to Esri metadata. There's other formats. There's lots of formats that can have metadata tags and blobs internally. And something that comes to mind is the GML JP2. So it's the JPEG 2000 can have embedded XML or GML in there. And that might have a lot of useful metadata, but you would have to extract that and then map it over to the Esri XML or let's say ISO 19115 XML standard. But yeah, that's a good point. Almost, if you just open up a data set in Data Inspector and FME generally, if there's any metadata in there, we will read it. If there's something we're not reading, let us know. But like things like NetCDF, GeoTIFF, there's a ton of tagging in there. And that can be very useful in terms of the source, what instrument platform it came from, who the author was, all that stuff.
There's another one that I left for you, Dean. So Matthew is currently using the custom transformers on the hub to do this, which will be deprecated soon. He's wondering, with the official connector, do we already descape the special XML characters like the one he's shown here with a space? Did you see any of those when you were downloading XML data?
That's a good question. I guess it just depends. So whether the XML characters are being treated as XML or a string. Yeah, I didn't see a lot of that, but if we have an issue where we should be escaping and we're not, because the XML metadata field should be treated as XML, yeah, we can certainly look into that and make sure things are being escaped appropriately and not kind of hashed over into these strings, because that I could see that causing trouble downstream. So we can have a look at that.
Yeah, that might be a good one to follow up on. I think that's most of the questions we had, unless you guys saw anything.
No.
Awesome. Okay, I will know. I'll leave things running a couple minutes longer after we've wrapped up, just so that if you do have any questions that come to mind, you can feel free to drop those in the questions tab, and we'll be sure to follow up by email or otherwise. With that, just a massive thank you to Bruce and Jordan as our guest speakers here today. Thank you for all of your time preparing the content in today's webinar. I've seen from the comments and the emoji reactions that it's been very valuable for our audience, and Dean as well for your time preparing content. Thanks to Phil and Sienna for joining us on Q&A today. And big thank you to our whole audience for taking the time out of your day to join us to learn more about metadata automation. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.
I just wanted to thank both Jordan and Bruce. It was a lot of fun presenting with you, and everybody has their own perspective, which kind of builds a richer story. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great.
It's fun to do, and thank you for hosting us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Have a good day, everybody, and thanks for your time.
Bye for now.